kind of you to call, Doctor.
Not at all, not at all. Dear me, I do have some professional pride, you know. I could hardly tell you you're going to die over the telephone.
What?
Despite already starting to make his name as a stand-up, Ben Elton first rose to fame writing The Young Ones alongside Lisa Mayer and Rick Mayall. But how was his first solo attempt at writing a series? Happy Families follows Guy, the only grandchild left at the Fuddle country estate. He is constantly vying for the love and approval of his sadistic grandmother, Edith Fuddle, a bitter old wealthy woman who has never revealed why she sent away his 4 sisters 20 years earlier.
All I want to know is, where is my family? What's happened to my mother? Why my sisters all left home? And why you hate me so much?
Well, I'm not going to tell you, so sod off.
After discovering that she is dying, she sends Guy across the world to find them before she pops her clogs. But they don't necessarily want to come back, and Guy's naivete and incompetence don't get him very far.
I'd like a ticket to France, please.
This is Liverpool. Ferry doesn't go to France.
Oh. Would you think it could drop me off?
Whilst this on its own is an interesting premise, what's more interesting is the multi-rolling gimmick, as Jennifer Saunders plays all members of the Fuddle family with the exception of Guy, played by Adrian Edmondson. I always enjoyed her in The Comic Strip Presents, which is honestly the only thing I've really seen her in apart from Shrek 2, to be honest, but I was still pleasantly surprised by her in this. I genuinely had to remind myself in the final episode that all the characters were played by the same person. She does a great job as the vain Cassie, the naive Madeline, the optimistic Joyce, and the street-smart Roxanne. I like that they all have different functions in each episode, like how Joyce is the main source of comedy in her episode, whilst with Roxanne, she gets the chance to be the straight woman. However, I think that my favourite character of the whole show was Guy, who basically ties the whole thing together. He's like a puppy, sweet, eager, desperate to be loved, and a complete idiot.
Are you in show business yourself then, sir?
Everybody's in show business in Tinseltown, baby. Every pump boy is a star.
Really? That's extraordinary.
A few moments later.
I don't want to get a reputation for being difficult. That's what finished Brando.
He walks a delicate tightrope of being likeable enough to want him to succeed, and yet still be a character we can laugh at with complete ease, which I love. Adrian Edmondson is obviously best known for the type of violent, drunken archetype that he played in his more popular sitcoms. But in The Comic Strip Presents, we also see him as this sort of posh, well-meaning idiot archetype, so it's nice to see him do a series of that. I love that he often succeeds through no fault of his own. The sisters just happen to be able to go back of their own accord, and he's done absolutely nothing to help with that, but he thinks he has. It's just comedy gold. In the book Didn't You Kill My Mother-in-Law, the story of alternative comedy in Britain from the comedy store to Saturday Live by Roger Wilmot and Peter Rosengard, Edmondson said that he was, and I quote, appalling in this. And, needless to say, I wholeheartedly disagree. Adrian Edmondson, if you're watching this, you are the most delightful screen presence in this show, amongst what I can only describe as an exquisite cast. Stop being so hard on yourself! Oh, and stop watching reviews of yourself, you sad pervy. As for the regular supporting cast at the Fuddle residence, there's Dawn French, who does a good job as the dotty boot-licking cook.
Tea's ready in the drawing room, Lovey.
If you ever call me Lovey again, cook, I shall take Mr. Fuddle's old hunting rifle and shove it up your behind.
Oh, Mrs. Fuddle, you spoil me.
As does Stephen Fry as the sexist and incompetent Dr. De Quincey.
Had to pick up a couple of urine samples. I've just been testing them now, and I'm afraid in Mrs. Fuddle's case at least there can be no doubt. The tests prove positive.
It definitely is urine, then.
I'd stake my reputation on it.
His comedy partner Hugh Laurie also appears as a fellow doctor, and as A Bit of Fry and Laurie is one of my favourite sketch shows, it was nice to see them together. Their scenes feel like they were plucked right out of their show, which isn't surprising considering that Elton had already written for some of their earlier sketch shows. I haven't seen them yet, so let me know if you want me to check them out in the comments. However, the standout of the Fuddleditch characters to me was Helen Lederer as Flossie, the cheeky housemaid who harbours a crush on young Master Guy. I've only seen her in the brief cameos she's made in other shows like The Young Ones and Filthy Rich and Cat Flap, but she was my favourite guest star in Bottom, as the nurse. Only kidding. As Lady Natasha, Letitia, Sarah Jane Wellesley, Obtromsky, Ponsonski, Smythe, Oblomov, Bobblomov, Dob, 3rd Viscountess of Moldavia. Yes, one take! Anyway, I thought she was great, and I must check out her stand-up at some point. As for guest stars, it's a real who's who of 80s comedy, with a combination of big names and faces you'll recognise from a cutaway gag in The Young Ones or two. There's too many to mention them all, but I'll talk about the ones that stood out the most episode by episode. The first episode is there to set up the premise and establish the Fuddleditch characters. It also gives us snippets of the different sisters that we'll see in upcoming episodes, making the wise move of showing arguably the two most famous and mainstream guest stars in the show, Jim Broadbent and Una Stubbs. It does a good job at this, and they give Guy a B story to establish how useless he is at persuasion and getting things done. Whilst I did like it, I wasn't particularly taken with that first episode. I definitely preferred episode 2, where Guy goes to Hollywood in search of Cassie, who has a leading role in an American soap opera. The satire of Hollywood is nothing you haven't seen before, but it's still very funny, with the British supporting cast getting the accents just right. To me at least. It's still caricatured, but it's consistent. To me, the most notable members of the supporting cast are Christopher Ryan as the director, who's probably best known as Mike from The Young Ones and Dave Hedgehog from Bottom, and Chris Barry of British Empire and Red Dwarf fame as Cassie's stylist. I thought they were both brilliant. I also really liked Lenny Henry in this. Next is Madeline in rural France, where she is learning from sleazy French poet Dalcroix, played by Jim Broadbent. He is so funny in this. I love this scene where he reads a poem he wrote for her.
Madeleine, Madeleine, will you go to bed with me? I fancy you something rotten, and I really wanted to go to bed with you. Please, please, will you go to bed with me, Madeleine? As a personal favor, Madeleine, remove my trousers. For like the rosebuds on a summer morn, they are bursting.
Forgive my dull foolishness, but I do not understand.
In opposition to his debauchery, there's the sleazy local priest, played by Rick Mayall. Despite the fact that his career is defined by playing revolting, perverted caricatures, like Edmondson does with violent, drunken caricatures, he still manages to make him look and feel distinct from his other characters of the same ilk. His character is followed by a gendarme played by Stephen Frost, who you might recognise from several small roles in The Young Ones, and Nigel Planer, who once again shows off his range as the pervy barman.
We have laws in this village, and one of them states it is illegal to make love to a woman under 45 unless a priest is present. And a gendarme.
And a barman.
The next episode follows the jolly Joyce, who has spent the last 20 years training to be a nun and convinced that she's the cheery protagonist of a boarding school novel.
300 million thoughts raced through Joyce's head as she sprinted down the wing. Everybody loved Joyce with her sparkling eyes, her healthy, ruddy cheeks, and her infectious high spirits.
This is by far the goofiest character Saunders plays in the show. In fact, it's the only goofy character I've seen her play apart from Little Sister in the comic strip Presents Slags, which she also wrote. She's probably both my favourite and least favourite Fuddle, because I'm fully aware that I am basically Joyce. I am this upbeat, annoying and deluded, and we have the same level of musical talent.
If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap. Come on, perk up, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, then you really ought to show it.
Anyway, the standout in this episode is the late Una Stubbs, who you will no doubt recognise either as Mrs. Hudson in Sherlock or Aunt Sally from the original series of Wurzel Gummidge. She plays the Mother Superior with a perfect passive-aggressive politeness and outshone everyone else in this episode.
You'll find me wise and kind and noble and good. No doubt at some point you'll develop little crushes on me, but that's no bad thing, as long as they remain innocent and girlish.
How do you solve a problem like Joyce?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it?
How do you catch a cloud and pin it down?
You beat the crap out of it.
Finally, there's Roxanne, who has fallen on hard times and gone to prison. As I said before, she's basically a straight woman in this episode, with all comedy coming from an interfering fly on the wall documentary team and caricatures representing both sides of the prison reform argument. Pauline Melville, who you'll most likely recognise as Vivian's mum from The Young Ones, makes a notable appearance as a prison guard, and Ben Elton himself makes a very funny appearance as the hip new Liberal governor.
No more heavy vibe scene of any kind. Now my door is always open, as is yours.
Whilst I liked all of the Fuddleditch characters, it was kind of annoying at times when they kept cutting back to them. Then again, I did not watch these as intended. I imagine this aspect works much better when watching each episode a week apart, instead of binging it in 24 hours like I did. The same goes for the recurring dream sequence Guy has, where he reminisces about pretending his sisters were still there to play with him. I imagine it was funnier when they were spread out week by week. I also think that, being a Circa Villain Inside Number 9 fan, I have unrealistically high standards for plot twists now. Out of all the revelations in the final episode, there's only one that I actually thought was both well set up and not easy to predict. All in all, I liked the final episode, but again, I preferred the more episodic ones. I was planning on waiting a while before doing another full series review, although it probably will be by the time I actually publish this, but I kept hearing about it, either from people recommending it to me in the comments of my Rick May videos, or from my older mutuals mentioning it on Twitter, so I decided to check it out for myself. Feel free to leave recommendations in the comments below. I've had some deep cuts recommended to me that I have never heard of, and I'm really excited to check them out. Without realising it, I actually ended up starting Happy Families on Saunders and Edmondson's wedding anniversary. Happy 39 years to them! In that book I was talking about earlier, the authors comment that, and I quote, "The principal problem is the inconsistency in the pitch of the acting. Jennifer Saunders acts fairly realistically throughout, with just enough comic exaggeration. Edmondson is well over the top, and some of the supporting players are allowed to indulge in wild overacting. This would not matter if the whole series were played at that sort of pitch, but the impression left is that the performers are not all living in the same world." Now, whilst I can partially see where they're coming from, particularly with the contrast between Saunders' performances and the rest of the cast, I honestly never found it an issue. I think there's plenty of comic strip episodes where she's more understated than the rest of the ensemble, regardless of whether or not she's playing a comedic or straight character, and it works fine. It's just what she does. Whilst I love her in it, it was interesting for me to learn that it was originally written for Emma Thompson, who was unable to do it because she was cast as the lead in Me and My Girl. I don't know if her acting style would have been better suited, because I haven't seen any of her early sketch comedy yet, but I think she would have done an equally good job. I think the blame for this would probably lie with director Paul Jackson rather than any of the cast, as he would be responsible for the casting and directing the level of the actors' performances. However, again, I didn't have a problem with it. I'm only really bringing this up because I know a lot of other people had an issue with it. I was able to enjoy everyone's performances as they were, but what is stylistic variation to me may well be tonal inconsistency to others. All in all, my issues with it were very minor, and I enjoyed the show as a whole. I would definitely recommend it to fans of the British alternative comedy movement, particularly Comic Strip Presents. Obviously, pretty much the whole cast are here, but it also has a similar feel, especially with each episode focusing on the individual sisters, as they are each parodying or in the style of a genre: American soap opera, French cinema, Ealing comedies, and gritty documentaries. However, it's not the kind of show where there's nothing there if you're unfamiliar with what they're parodying. There's plenty of different types of humour here for you to enjoy. I also recommend it if you are a fan of anyone in the cast or Ben Elton's other work, although it's quite different from the stuff I've seen him do before. What you may be wondering is why this was never made available on streaming or in any type of home media at all. Well, from the looks of it, it all comes down to the C word. That's right, copyright. The songs used throughout the show, and the BBC or any other distributor would have to buy the rights to use the songs in any future releases. Whilst the BBC are prepared to do this for a show like The Young Ones, at least for the most recent DVD and Blu-ray releases, it's unlikely that they would ever do this for a show like this. I know that with Only Fools and Horses, they replaced copyrighted songs on DVD, and I think that this could be possible, but I don't think that they can be bothered for a show that people don't seem to remember all that much. I hadn't mentioned the use of songs so far because, whilst they were used well, I didn't consider them to be that big a part of the show. It's probably best remembered as a footnote in the history of Red Dwarf, as the budget that the BBC had originally allocated for a second series of Happy Families ended up going to the first series of the sci-fi sitcom instead. I actually haven't seen Red Dwarf yet, so let me know if you want me to review that at some point in the comments below. If you want to see me discuss Ben Elton's first sitcom starring Adrian Edmondson, you can watch my review of The Young Ones here. See you soon!
Swim for it. No, man, we'll drown. Well, let's drown for it.